My 19-year-old son Zephyr professed his emotions for me while my husband was away on business. Our confusing and overwhelming feelings caused us to breach a line. Even after my spouse returned, I maintained our contact. I'm unsure how to proceed. The most intense yet exhilarating night of my life occurred on a peaceful Friday. Lying on my back, I looked up at the dim patterns of moonlight on the ceiling. My mind confused and restless, I felt alone because my husband Orion was gone for another 2 months, and I hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. I didn't know I wasn't alone until I heard the faint creak of the door breaking the silence. I sat up slowly, staring at the faint form in the doorway. My son Zephyr stood there, his broad shoulders silhouetted by the dim hallway light. He paused, one hand grasping the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He said, "Mom." Quietly and hesitantly, I rubbed my eyes and felt a knot grow in my chest at the sound of his words. "What's wrong?" I inquired. He didn't answer right away, standing motionless with his shadow reaching over the room. After a while, he stepped inside, his bare feet producing quiet thuds against the carpet. Something about his movements, cautious and even afraid, made the air in the room feel heavier. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was 2 a.m. Zephyr wasn't the sort to wake me up unless something bothered him. My chest constricted as I swung my legs over the bed, motioning for him to get closer. "What's going on?" I inquired gently. He paused again before sitting on the edge of the bed, his posture straight and his hands securely gripped in his lap. I observed him for a minute, but he kept his gaze fixed on the floor, anxiety emanating from him. "Zephyr, you can talk to me," I murmured softly. "Whatever it is, I am here." He took a nervous breath, fumbling with the hem of his t-shirt. "It's difficult to explain," he admitted ultimately. "I've been sensing something. I've been feeling strange, and I'm not sure what to do about it." His comments caused a shiver of discomfort through me. Despite the worry in my gut, I leaned slightly forward and kept my voice firm. "How are they different?" He gazed up at me, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that took me by surprise. "It's about someone," he explained, his voice falling. "Someone I have been thinking a lot about, someone you won't anticipate." Relief briefly lit through me. Perhaps this was about a girl at school, a crush he was unsure how to handle. Zephyr had always been reserved with his emotions, keeping them bottled up until they were overwhelming. "Okay," I replied, giving him a comforting grin. "Who is it?" "Someone from school." He shook his head swiftly, and his gaze dropped again. "No," he responded quietly. "It is not someone from school." "Then who?" I softly pressed, yet a peculiar dread began to crawl into my chest. "Zephyr, tell me, whatever it is, we will figure it out." He took a big breath, his chest rising and falling as if to summon bravery. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. "It's you, Mom," he finally said. "It has always been you." The word struck me like a tidal wave, leaving me breathless. For a minute, I couldn't speak or think. My mind raced to process what he had just said, but the impact left me reeling. "Zephyr," I began, my voice wavering. "So what are you saying?" He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a trapped animal, his hands going through his hair, tugging on the strands as if attempting to extract the words from his thoughts. "I understand how that sounds," he replied swiftly. "I know what I'm doing is terrible, but I can't stop myself. I have tried. I've tried so hard to push it away and ignore it, but it's always there." I stared at him, my pulse thumping so hard that I could barely hear his words. "Zephyr, don't tell me this isn't genuine," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "You understand how I feel. I have never felt this way about anyone else. It is not merely admiration or a silly crush. It's much deeper." "Zephyr," I whispered again, my voice trembling. You are my son, and what you are experiencing is not love. It is something else. It's love, he exclaimed, his voice with emotion. You are everything to me, Mom. You're the only person who has ever understood me. The only person who has ever made me feel worth something. How could this not be love? My eyes welled up with tears as I attempted to understand what he had said. My son, my darling boy whom I had reared and loved wholeheartedly, was expressing emotions I didn't understand. I was unable to return the feelings, but something inside me stirred. A strange combination of emotions that I didn't want to admit. Looking back, I believe I did not realize it. At first, I believe I attempted to ignore it. Zephyr, you're puzzled. You are going through a lot right now, and maybe these feelings aren't confusing, he added, turning to face me. His eyes were hazy with unshed tears, and his jaw was set with a resolve that made my chest hurt. I have never been more certain about anything in my life. I spotted it right then. I could feel how drawn he was to me. I didn't want to ignore it, but as his mother, I had to. I reached out and put my hand on his arm. Zephyr, I murmured gently. These feelings will pass. I promise you that they will pass. When they do, you'll notice things more clearly. What if they don't? He muttered, his voice breaking. What if this is who I am? What if this is how I should feel? My throat clenched, and for a moment, I was unable to speak. I did not have the response he was looking for. I had no idea how to soothe the agony in his eyes. All I could do was hold out hope that time would bring clarity and that this event would not define us. You are not alone in this, I finally spoke, my voice shaky but resolute. We'll get through this, Zephyr. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes full of vulnerability, making my heart ache. I don't want to lose you, Mother, he whispered softly. I cannot lose you. You won't, I responded firmly, grabbing his arm. Whatever happens, I will always be here. Why not join me tonight? Perhaps it will help a little, I murmured, returning to my sheets. He nodded slowly and stepped into the bed. I drew him in, feeling something I hadn't mentioned to him. I said, "Good night, honey." And he smiled at me. The hush that followed was oppressive but not terrible. It was the kind of silence that contained promises, delicate yet genuine. As he closed his eyes, I felt a flicker of hope that we could weather this storm, no matter how impossible it appeared. But deep down, I knew it was merely the beginning. A night like this was bound to happen again, but it would finish in a very different way. This time, nothing happened, but more was on the way, especially with a relationship as convoluted as this. Love does not fade silently. It demands to be reckoned with, but I had no notion what that reckoning would look like. The morning following Zephyr's confession felt unreal. The typical silence of the house in Starhaven suddenly pressed down on me like a stifling weight. Every corner, every familiar thing, seemed to resonate with the unspoken tension between us. I attempted to keep myself busy with housework, believing that the regularity would help me feel grounded. My hands trembled as I folded clothing, and my mind raced with unanswered thoughts. What exactly did this mean for us? For him, for me. The sound of a chair scraping on the kitchen floor shocked me. Zephyr sat at the table, staring at a bowl of cereal that looked as untouched as my coffee. His hair was tangled, and his eyes were clouded with tiredness. He hadn't slept, and neither had I. Morning, I spoke cautiously, breaking the silence. He looked up with an inscrutable face. Morning, he responded hoarsely. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the sound of it filling the mug louder than necessary. I joined him at the table, and the distance between us felt both too vast and too close. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Everything that had not been stated hung in the air. I started telling Zephyr about last night, but he interrupted me. I intended what I said, he spoke firmly, despite the conflict in his eyes. I won't pretend I didn't. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing myself to remain quiet. I know you're being honest, I said softly. But Zephyr, what you're feeling is beyond our ability to control. It is not something we should act upon. He leaned back in his chair, his hands grabbing the table edge. Why not? He asked, his voice tinted with irritation. Why does love have to adhere to rules and boundaries? Isn't love meant to be free? I took a deep breath and searched for the proper words. Love is more than simply how we feel, Zephyr, I explained. It is about doing what is right and beneficial to all parties concerned. And what you're saying could hurt both of us. He turned away, his jaw stiffening. I do not want to hurt you, he said quietly. That is the last thing I want. I know, I said, reaching across the table and placing my hand on his. I don't want to hurt you either. That's why we have to be careful. We need to find a method to go over this. His fingers squeezed around mine, and for a minute, I saw him as the boy he once was. The youngster who had grabbed my hand when he was afraid, who looked to me for help and comfort. But this was different. He looked at me differently now. I'm not sure if I can get over it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But I'll try. Tears welled up in my eyes, thinking about you. I gave his hand a light squeeze. That is all I ask. The days that followed were a whirl of awkward talks and imposed normality. Zephyr attempted to maintain his distance by going to his room or spending long hours away from the house in Starhaven. I convinced myself it was for the best. The space would allow him to analyze his emotions. But I missed him. Everything had changed, including the easy rapport we had previously had. We've slept in the same bed every night since he confessed. However, I noticed a distance between us. One evening, while I was preparing dinner, I heard the front door open and close. Zephyr entered the kitchen, his hair drenched from the rain. He looked at me for a long time, as if debating whether to say something. Hey, I said, trying to keep a pleasant tone. You're just in time. Dinner is almost ready. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped over to the counter and leaned on it, arms crossed. He finally admitted, I've been thinking. What was this about? I inquired. About us, he stated, his gaze steady, regarding what I stated that night. I swallowed hard and braced myself. I knew immediately the night he was referring to. Of course, Zephyr, I said. I thought we'd agreed. I know, he interrupted, and I am not here to argue. I just need to say this. I nodded and motioned for him to continue. I've been trying to figure out how to deal with these feelings, he spoke softly yet firmly. And then I realized something. I do not want to lose what we have, Mom. Even if the outcome is not what I had hoped for, I would rather have you as my mother than lose you totally. Relief flooded over me, but it was tempered by the grief in his voice. Zephyr, you will not lose me, I said. No matter what, I will always be there for you. He nodded, his lips forming a thin line. I understand, he said, his voice gentle, but it's hard. It's extremely hard. I moved closer and placed my hand on his arm. It will take time, I remarked gently. But you are strong, Zephyr, and I will help you in any way I can. His eyes met mine. For a brief while, the tension between us appeared to lessen. Thanks, Mom, he said softly. This means a lot. We stood in the kitchen, the rain hammering on the windows. For the first time in days, I felt like we'd be fine. However, life has a tendency of complicating matters when you least expect it. Just as I thought we had gained some form of peace, something happened that threatened to destabilize everything. Zephyr and I had created an uneasy truce, which maintained for a while, fragile but functional. He tried to smile more, to chuckle at my jokes, to join me for meals as he used to. I held on to those times, believing myself that things were improving. However, late at night, when the home in Starhaven was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, the weight of his confession lingered. After a long day at work, I spotted Zephyr in the living room. He sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television. An old sitcom's laugh track echoed strangely in the otherwise quiet room. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. I sat next to him and asked, "Are you okay?" He shrugged. "Yeah, just thinking." I hesitated to speak about anything in particular. He laughed softly, but there was no comedy in it. "What am I not thinking about?" My stomach turned. "Zephyr, I thought we were getting past this." "I'm trying," he said swiftly. "I actually am, but it isn't that simple. You cannot simply turn off feelings like a switch." "I know," I replied softly. "And I do not expect you to. But we need to keep working on it, for both of our sakes." He turned to face me, his gaze seeking mine. "Have you ever considered it?" he asked abruptly, his voice low. "About us. Imagine what it would be like if things were different." I froze when he asked, caught off guard. "Zephyr, do not lie to me," he urged, his tone more frantic than commanding. "Please tell me the truth." I looked away, my thoughts racing. The reality was difficult. I was tangled up in emotions that I couldn't quite understand. "Of course, I thought about it," I finally admitted, forcing my voice to remain even. "How could I not, given what you had said?" But admitting those sentiments, even to myself, felt like crossing a boundary that I couldn't reverse. "It doesn't matter what I've thought," I continued. "What's important is that you do the correct thing. And this isn't correct." He sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "I know you think so, but what if—" "No, Zephyr," I interrupted, speaking strongly. "There is no what if. We are not having this conversation." He stared at me for a long time, his expression a mixture of frustration and despair. "You're terrified," he finally admitted. "Yes," I admitted, "because it isn't just about you and me. It's about all we've built and everything we risk losing." But I was lying. I was afraid, but not for the right reasons. I was hesitant to tell him that I had been feeling something for the past few days, something I was afraid to acknowledge. He did not respond. The hush that followed was deafening. Finally, he rose, his movement stiff and slow. "I'm going for a walk," he stated, approaching the door. "Zephyr." I started, but he had already left. Hours passed slowly, and each minute felt like an eternity. I sat near the window and watched the street in Starhaven. My fear grew with each passing moment. Zephyr did not return. It wasn't until almost midnight when I heard the door open. I ran to the entryway, relief coursing through me as I watched him enter inside, drenched from the rain. "Zephyr, where were you?" I inquired, my voice wavering. "Walking," he said simply, shaking the water out of his hair. I got a towel from the bathroom and gave it to him. "You are going to get sick," I remarked, my worry spilling over. He sighed, clearly irritated. "You can't simply disappear like that." I needed to clear my mind, he explained, running the towel over his face. "Did it help?" I asked while crossing my arms. He glanced at me with dark, unfathomable eyes. "Not really," he said quietly. Something in his tone made me hesitate. I moved closer and lowered my voice. "Zephyr, we cannot go on like this. It's ripping us apart." "I know," he muttered, barely audible. "But I'm not sure how to stop." "Perhaps we need assistance," I remarked. "Someone to speak with, a therapist." His lips formed a bitter smile. "Do you think a therapist will comprehend this?" "They might," I responded, but I wasn't sure I believed it. "Or at least help us figure out how to proceed." He shook his head, and the towel dropped to the floor. "Nobody can cure this, Mom. Nobody can affect how I feel." His words hung in the air, thick and unwavering. I wanted to dispute and tell him he was incorrect. But deep down, I knew he was correct. The saddest part was that I had yet to tell him that I, too, felt something, that I was the one deceiving him, attempting to avoid my own love for him. I knew, but I didn't say anything for now. The following days were a flurry of avoidance and awkward discussions. Zephyr attempted to act normally, but the tension between us was evident. Every interaction felt like walking a wire, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to crack. That item arrived one evening when we were cleaning up after dinner. Zephyr had been abnormally quiet throughout the day, his motions tight and precise. As I filled the dishwasher, he leaned against the counter and watched me. "Mom," he exclaimed abruptly, shattering the silence. "I need to tell you something." I turned to face him, my heart racing. "What is it?" "I can't do it anymore," he murmured, his voice quivering. "I can't keep pretending things are fine." "Zephyr, we've discussed this," I said. But he shook his head. "No, you do not understand," he responded, his voice rising. "I can't simply turn off how I feel. I can't keep pretending I'm fine when I am not." "So what do you want me to do?" I inquired, my frustration boiling out. "What are you expecting me to say?" "I'm not sure," he responded, his voice cracking. "I just need you to see me and understand how much this is tearing me apart." "I see you," I murmured, my voice quivering. "Now I see you every day, Zephyr, and it hurts my heart to see you this way. But I'm not sure how to solve it." He took a step closer, his gaze locked on mine. "You cannot solve it," he murmured softly. "But maybe we don't need to." I stared at him, my thoughts racing. "Zephyr, what are you saying?" He didn't respond. Instead, he bridged the gap between us, his hand brushing against mine. My breath caught, and the air between us felt electrified. But the moment did not last. I moved back, severing the connection. "No," I replied firmly, my voice shaking. "We can't." His face crushed, pain imprinted on every line. "I'm sorry," he said before turning and walking away. I stood there with my heart beating. The weight of what had just transpired weighed heavily on me. For no matter how much I tried to deny it, something inside me had responded to him. That worried me more than anything. I reflected on the nights we had spent together. He had been touching me more than usual in recent days, and I discovered that I was doing the same with him. I believe he also observed it, and that is why he initiated the conversation. However, the days after that moment in the kitchen were like walking through a storm, unpredictable and overpowering. Zephyr and I avoided one another more than ever. When we did cross paths, our silence spoke more than words. I persuaded myself it was for the best, that the distance between us was just what we needed. But the fact was that every time I watched him retreat to his room and saw a glimpse of pain in his eyes, it tore at me. I spent nights watching the scene over and over. The way he looked at me, the gravity of his words, and how my heart had deceived me in that fleeting moment of connection. It wasn't correct. It was not. However, rejecting the complexities of our emotions seemed to exacerbate the damage. Zephyr entered the living room one evening when I was reading a book. He stopped at the threshold, unsure whether he was welcome. His hair was disheveled, and his expression was cautious. This was the time to confess, to tell him how I felt. "Zephyr," I spoke gently, my voice quieter than normal. He looked up, trying to retain a neutral attitude. "Hey," he responded. "What's up?" He moved deeper into the room but did not sit, instead pacing slowly near the edge of the coffee table. "I wanted to talk," I said, looking at him momentarily before turning away. "I know things have been difficult for both of us." He nodded, then closed and laid the book aside. "Yes, they have. But, Mom," he explained, I don't want you to believe I don't care. I do, more than you realize. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. I know you care, I explained. That's why this is so difficult, because I can't let go, no matter how hard I try or how many times I tell myself to go on, Mom. He began, but I raised my hand. Let me finish, I said. I've spent a lot of time trying to find out what's wrong with me and why I'm feeling this way. But the more I think about it, the more I understand. It is not wrong to be in love, is it, even if it does not follow the rules, even if it scares them? I swallowed hard, my own words piercing something deep within me. Love isn't wrong, I explained carefully. However, there are occasions when taking action is necessary, especially when it could harm those we care about. He nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated the response but needed to hear it nonetheless. I get that, he said. I do, but what should I do with these feelings? Bury them, pretend they do not exist. No, I finally replied, shaking my head. You do not have to pretend. I also need to confess something. I'm only telling you this to aid you to direct your emotions into something that will help you grow. This is not anything that will hold you back. He fell into the chair across from me, his shoulders sagging. This is easier said than done, Mom, but tell me, what do you have to confess? Well, Zephyr, I replied softly, I believe you have already observed that to some extent. For the past few nights, we have been sleeping together. For a moment, he did not answer. Then, to my astonishment, he gave a small laugh. What, your touches? He asked. Of course, I noticed, he replied. But I told myself you did it to make me feel better. To be honest, they just make me feel lost. They make me feel so close to my goal but still so far away. You are not lost, I said, leaning forward. You're still finding your way, and that's fine. Hey, that's part of growing up. He stared at me with vulnerability in his eyes, which made my chest ache. I don't want to lose you, Mom, he stated. I cannot lose you. You won't, I responded firmly. Whatever happens, I'll be here. This will never change. Without him noticing, my heart was hammering in my chest. I still had not informed him how I felt. That those touches weren't merely for his benefit but because I wanted something deep inside. So, I resolved not to let him come between us anymore. I needed to clear my mind and tell him how I felt. But let me finish what I was about to say, Zephyr, I said. Those touches, they weren't intended to make you feel good. They what? He inquired. I stated that I did it because I was feeling something as well. In fact, I can still feel something, Zephyr. I was afraid to tell you because I'm your mother, and it feels wrong. It shouldn't be real, how we feel about each other. But I cannot deny it. He remained silent for a time before leaning towards me and grasping my leg. I told Zephyr, we can't do this. What about Dad? We can, he muttered. No one needs to know. But I noticed hesitation in his eyes. I leaned in and kissed him deeply, but not for long. I knew we couldn't do it. And I knew he wasn't certain either, so I pushed him away. Let's have a good night's rest and chat tomorrow, okay? He nodded, but we both knew the tension hadn't subsided. We both went to the restroom, washed our teeth, and prepared for bedtime. While putting on my pajamas, I smiled at him as he washed his face. For the past few weeks, I've spent most of my time in bed. We'd been sleeping together since the first night of his confession, so it was natural for him to join me. A few moments later, he entered the room, and before he reached the bed, I opened the sheets so he could climb in. As I indicated previously, the tension persisted. So I said, let's just get some rest, and then we'll talk about everything tomorrow before Dad returns. Okay, he replied. It felt as if he had already accepted that nothing would happen, but I sure hadn't. Unfortunately, I turned off the nightlight and said, "Good night, honey." Turning away from him. "Good night, Mom," he responded. My mind was whirling. A few minutes seemed like hours. My thoughts were disorganized. At one point, my foot brushed against his leg, partially by intent and partly by chance. He did not turn away. And before I realized it, I had drawn him closer to me. He grabbed my leg, so I turned around. I paused for a while but then let everything happen. I kissed him, and we went further than that. I won't go into detail about what happened. But I let myself go, and for a moment, I felt alive. I could forget about everything that had bothered me in the previous few weeks. I closed my eyes and let the moment wash over me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. This was not wrong. It was not confusing. It was love, pure and straightforward affection. And it was the type of love that had developed naturally between us. Years of care, trust, and understanding are giving way to new growth. That's what I convinced myself when we were together. But as fast as it began, it stopped. I suppose it was too stimulating for him. When Zephyr backed away, he smiled at me. "We're fine, right?" I nodded and made my way to the restroom. The next few weeks were better, even easy. Zephyr seemed more at ease. However, there were times when the hostility between us returned. His father had returned, and he began spending more time outdoors, hanging out with pals and resuming some of the interests he had abandoned. In the last year, I've immersed myself in my routines, finding comfort in the small daily duties that kept life moving in Starhaven. But as much as I wanted to believe we were healing, the undercurrent of what had happened between us persisted. It was an invisible thread that held us together in ways neither of us could totally escape. I still haven't told my husband what occurred. Zephyr and I haven't discussed it either. I don't know what to do or think. What are your thoughts on this? I'm curious to hear other people's perspectives. That is why I am sharing this story. It's unbelievable what happened, yet I can't deny it. Furthermore, I will never be able to undo what has happened.